Racist employee humiliates black twins at the bank without knowing who their father was. It was a sunny Tuesday morning, but with that cold, early autumn air. Luna and Leah Vasconcelos, identical 13-year-old twins, walked side by side to the main branch of Banco Grande Capital. They wore their uniforms from the Aurelio Mendez School, navy blue blazer, gray skirt, and freshly waxed black loafers. On their faces, a mixture of nervousness and pride. In Luna's backpack, carefully stored inside a plastic binder, was the check for $3,000, a prize they had won for developing, in pairs, an ecological project that won an award in a national student innovation contest. It was an achievement, a personal achievement, and more than that, it was the first time they would make a bank transaction alone, without the presence of an adult. A symbolic step towards autonomy. They had urged their father to go alone. "It's important that we learn," Luna said at breakfast. "If we won the award, we have to know how to take care of it." The father, hesitant at first, smiled with a proud look and nodded. As they walked through the revolving doors of the stately branch, with its pale marble-clad walls and gleaming golden signs, the girls exchanged one last complicit glance. Leah whispered, "Let's show that we can do it." The security of the phrase contrasted with the nervousness in his fingers, which held tightly the strap of his backpack. They went straight to the service counter, waiting politely and quietly in the small line, observing the surrounding environment carefully. Inside, everything seemed to belong to an adult and inaccessible world. Men in suits hurried across the corridors. Attendants typed frantically on silent keyboards, and the sound of air conditioning filled the space with a faint vibration. But, even in this scenario of formality, the two remained firm. They were young, yes, but they knew the value of what they had in their hands. The check represented more than money. It represented effort, nights studying, weekends developing prototypes, the support of teachers, and the pride of parents. It represented voice. It represented achievement. It was the first seed of something bigger, perhaps a future international exchange, perhaps a sustainable startup, perhaps a world that saw them as protagonists. But what Luna and Leah didn't know yet was that in that bank, on that day, they would not be seen as bright girls with promising futures. They would be seen as something very different, and what would come next would have nothing to do with the value of the check, but with something that no one dared to say out loud, only show it with their eyes, and that look had already begun to form behind the counter. The first sign that something was wrong came as a subtle fissure, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying attention. As soon as the twins approached the service counter, with their documents in hand and the check protected inside the binder, the manager in charge, Clara Martins, raised her eyes from her screen and rested them on them. Her lips twitched slightly, as if they were holding an inconvenient question. The professional smile expected in any banking environment did not come. Luna was the first to speak, her voice polite and firm. "Good morning. We would like to deposit this check into our joint account." He held out the transparent envelope with the award, along with the school ID and the letter of the contest. Clara didn't even touch the documents. He just took the check as if it were a personal offense. An uncomfortable silence hung for an instant. She then tilted her head and, without taking her eyes off the girls, said, "Are you sure this is yours?" Leah, surprised by the question, tried to maintain a respectful tone. "Yes, ma'am. We won this amount in a national contest. Here's the award letter." Clara interrupted with a dry gesture of her hand. He picked up the check with his fingertips, as if he were touching something improper. He lifted him up against the light, turned to a side attendant and muttered, "You can call the supervisor. This here's it's not hitting." The words were not spoken with aggression, but with a kind of polite contempt that cuts deeper than a scream. The attendant, visibly embarrassed, walked away in silence. And that's when the looks began. First from two customers who were waiting in line. Then an employee who passed by the salon with a tablet in her hand. Inquisitiveness, judgment, muffled whispers. What the girls had heard about in the history books. Now it was being felt on my skin. Luna looked at Leah. The two were used to communicating with their eyes. Leah knew exactly what she was thinking. Why are they treating us like this? What did we do wrong? Nothing. They had done nothing wrong. They just existed. And apparently, that was enough to cause discomfort. Clara then addressed them in a more severe tone. "I'll need to take this check for internal verification. Can you wait there in the corner, please?" It was not a request. It was a disguised order. A message, "You don't belong here." The girls obeyed in silence. They walked to a small waiting area near the back of the branch, where upholstered chairs formed, an empty circle. There, sitting next to each other, they felt for the first time the weight of being seen not as winners, but as suspects. As if the fact that they are black, young, and confident girls was, in itself, a reason for distrust. Time passed slowly, and the feeling of isolation increased. People passed them, but none offered help or a kind look. They were not being ignored. They were being watched, and that was much worse. It was there in that quiet, cold corner of the bank that Luna and Leah began to realize. The hardest test they would face that day was not about finances. It was about dignity, and they didn't even know that the worst was yet to come. The minutes seemed to have no end. The agency's air conditioning made the environment even colder, and the upholstery of the chairs where Luna and Leah were sitting no longer offered any comfort. They exchanged silent glances, trying to keep their composure, but the tension in their shoulders and the restlessness in their fingers betrayed their apparent calm. Every step of an employee on the marble floor, every whisper behind the counters, echoed like a threat, until Clara Martins returned, without looking directly at them, with the check still in her hands and a new expression on her face. A harsh expression, cold, from someone who had already decided something, even without any concrete proof. She approached the main counter and called in a low voice the branch supervisor, a man named Rubens, who promptly placed himself next to her, and it was then that Luna listened. Clara did not realize that the distance between them was not enough to drown out her words. "That check doesn't match. 2 high school girls with that amount? This here, it doesn't make sense. It may have been faked. We need to activate the central." Rubens looked at the check, then at the girls, and frowned with uncertainty. He mumbled something that Luna couldn't catch, but the tone was one of doubt. Not about the check, but about how to handle the situation. Clara, however, was already decided. She then turned to Luna and Leah, crossed her arms, and said loud and clear, so that everyone in the agency could hear, "We are facing many cases of fraud recently. You'll need to wait while we do a more in-depth check. And for safety reasons, please hand in the documents. We will temporarily hold them." The phrase fell like a bomb. Luna swallowed. Leah shook his hand discreetly. The two were silent for a few seconds, trying to understand if it was really real. "Our documents?" Luna asked, her voice low, not aggressive, just surprised. "Yes," Clara replied harshly. "Standard procedure. I've seen this kind of attempt before. That guy." The words lodged in the girls' chests like barbs. It was no longer about a check. It wasn't about the value. It was about the profile, about how they were seen, as uncomfortable exceptions, like risks. How? Invaders of a space where, in Clara's eyes, they should never have stepped on. Even nervous, Luna and Leah handed over the documents, and Clara caught them as if confiscating evidence of a crime. After that, he turned to Rubens and whispered something, looking suspiciously at the girls' backpacks. Rubens hesitated but nodded. The next move was even more humiliating. "Security," Clara called. "Accompany the girls to the observation room. They should remain under supervision until the verification is complete." A burly guard approached. The twins did not resist. They were confused, but they knew that any reaction could make everything worse. They were taken to a small glass room from where they could see the inside of the branch. But now, everyone could see them too. As if they were suspicious of something, as if they were guilty, as if they had done something wrong. And the cruelest thing of all was to know they had done nothing. But in a few minutes, That check, which was the fruit of honor, effort, and recognition, had been transformed into a symbol of a silent accusation. And there, sitting, isolated and exposed, Luna and Leah realized that the system did not want to confirm whether the check was genuine. He wanted to confirm if they were worthy of existing in that space. Little did they know that, outside the branch, someone was already on his way. And with it would come the turnaround that no one would have been able to predict. The room where Luna and Leah were placed was not a waiting room. It was a surveillance room. A glass-enclosed cubicle with two cold metal chairs leaning against the wall, a camera in the corner, and a small counter where a security guard crossed his arms, without saying a word. Nothing there seemed welcoming. Nothing there said, "We're just checking information." Everything there shouted, "You don't belong here." Outside, the agency's movement continued normally, but now, with curious eyes turned to them, customers passed by and slowed down. Some whispered, others just watched in silence. What did they see? Two girls in school uniforms, sitting side by side with their faces tense and their hands joined. For many, the doubt was already planted. I wonder what they did. Luna stared through the glass wall, trying to keep her breathing under control. Leah, more sensitive, began to tear up, but neither of them cried. From a young age, they learned that crying in front of those who humiliate you is like giving victory on a platter. But there, in that forced exhibition, everything seemed unbearably unfair. The guard next to them didn't say a word. I just watched. He seemed instructed not to answer. And when Leah asked gently if they could call their parents, he replied dryly, "Not until the manager authorizes it." There was no telephone, there was no welcome. Just the ticking of the clock on the wall and the feeling that time was dragging, devouring the confidence of the girls minute by minute. On the other side of the glass room, Clara talked to Rubens and two other employees, gesticulating, giving orders, seeming to explain something important. But she never looked at the girls. Never. It was as if they were an administrative nuisance, an embarrassing problem that needed to be kept away from the bank's window, but at the same time exposed enough to serve as an example. An elderly couple passed by and murmured, "Look, a pity, so young." These words pierced Leah like a needle. It was no longer just humiliation, it was public condemnation. People were creating narratives based on a manipulated image. The image of two black teenagers sitting in a glass room as if they were a threat. And then came the cruelest moment. Clara, passing near the room, gave a brief glance and muttered to one of the security guards on the other side, "Stay tuned. If they try to leave, block it." The guard nodded. Luna listened. She read it too. And in that moment, they understood. They were not just being ignored, they were being watched, as suspects, as criminals. Indignation boiled, but it found no room to explode. They had learned from their parents that sometimes silence is more powerful than screaming, because it saves everything that needs to be said for the right time. And that hour was about to come, because outside the bank a black car had just parked in front of the revolving door, and the person who came out of it, he was someone who would transform the game definitively. While Luna and Leah remained seated, motionless under surveillance, the movement outside the room continued as if nothing was wrong. But inside them, something had already changed. The initial pain gave way to a deep restlessness, an urgent desire for someone to see, that someone knew, and someone knew. The bank's emergency phone rang, directly on the internal management line. Clara answered with her usual coldness, waiting for another protocol. But it was enough to hear the voice on the other end of the line for her tone to change. "Good morning. This is from the Grand Capital headquarters. We need to confirm urgent information about an account linked to the beneficiaries identified as Luna Vasconcelos and Leah Vasconcelos." The name hit like thunder inside Clara's brain. She froze for a second, disguised her fright, and replied cautiously, "Yes, they are here. What is the reason for the call?" "We verified that the account in question is linked to the bank's executive board. The incumbent is Mr. Arthur Vasconcelos." He is the global CEO of the Grand Capital Group. Clara's blood emptied. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The phone almost slipped out of his hand. Her mind raced trying to understand how two ordinary girls, whom she had judged as some nuisance, could be linked to the most powerful figure in the institution. We need to know if there is any problem in progress, as we have received a notification of possible improper blocking of the check in the name of the minors. Mr. Vasconcelos was alerted. Before Clara could answer, a distinct noise was heard coming from the revolving door of the entrance. The movement in the lobby ceased for a moment. All the employees, including Rubens, stopped to look. It was him. Tall, impeccable posture, tailored suit, overwhelming presence, and a serene but unmistakably determined expression. Arthur Vasconcelos, the man who signed resignations with a gesture, the name that made the bank's shares rise or fall. He crossed the lobby in a straight line, as if he knew exactly where to go, and he knew. His eyes landed directly on the glass room where his daughters were trapped. Luna's heart raced. Leah jumped to her feet. They looked at each other, relief and unbelief mixed like a whirlwind. Clara tried to intercept him halfway. "Mr. Vasconcelos, I can explain. There was a misunderstanding, but he passed through it as a wall pierces the fog. He opened the door to the room. Not a word. He just stretched out his arms. Luna and Leah ran up to him, hugging him tightly. He welcomed them firmly with his eyes closed and his jaw cracked. Then he turned slowly to face Clara. The silence on the bench was so dense that you could hear the hands of the clock. All the customers and employees stared, but now not at the girls. The focus had shifted. The real power was exposed. "You isolated my daughters," Arthur said at last, in a low, controlled voice. "And now, you'll explain to me why." Arthur Vasconcelos did not need to raise his voice. He was the kind of man who commanded environments with silence, and at that moment his presence was like a subtle earthquake. No one screamed, no one ran, but everything trembled inside. He was facing Clara Martins, the manager who until minutes ago ran the bank as if it were the court of justice itself. And now, it seemed smaller than ever. "You isolated my daughters," he repeated with a firmness that cut through the air like a thin blade. He questioned the authenticity of a nationally recognized award. He took the documents from them. He called security, and it allowed them to be judged publicly by an act of merit. Clara swallowed. His voice faltered as he tried to defend himself. "Sir, I didn't know who they were." Arthur interrupted without even raising his hand. "That's exactly the problem, Clara. You needed to know who they were. As citizens, as young winners, as legitimate customers, as human beings." The silence was absolute. Employees frozen in their positions. Customers seated but leaning over, watching the scene as if it were a movie in real time. Rubens, the supervisor, lowered his eyes, embarrassed. Arthur then turned to the others present. His voice rose just enough to reach every corner of the room. "What happened here today is not just a misconduct. It is a cultural reflex, and I assure you, this ends now." He took his executive badge from his pocket, silver with the bank's symbol, and held it up in front of everyone. The revelation spread like a bolt of lightning through the eyes. Some customers stood up, surprised. Others began to murmur. The most attentive already connected the dots. The girls, the last name, the executive account, the posture. Clara took a step back, trying to compose herself, but it was too late. The authority she used as a shield had disappeared. And there, in front of everyone, she found herself naked. Not in clothes, but in morals. She had despised two children, not for lack of information, but for excessive prejudice. "You didn't fail my daughters, Clara. You have failed the most basic principle that underpins this institution: respect." Arthur then turned to the security guard, who still remained next to the glass room. "From now on, any order coming from this manager is suspended. And you," he said, looking at Clara, "are dismissed." With immediate effect, it was like thunder. The dismissal came not only with legal weight, but with a powerful symbolic charge. a public adjustment in front of everyone on the same stage, where Luna and Leah had been humiliated. An act of direct, clear, and straightforward justice. Clara tried to mumble something, but his voice disappeared before he even formed the sentence. Arthur then looked at his daughters. He touched each one's shoulder gently, and for the first time since he arrived, he smiled. A proud smile, but also a sad one. Because he knew, no father wants to use his power to protect his daughters within the very bank he runs. And that smile said it all. This story doesn't end here. This will still echo far beyond these marble walls. What followed the announcement of Clara Martin's resignation was not chaos. It was something far more powerful. The respectful silence of the truth being acknowledged. A silence full of teary eyes, heads that nodded in agreement, and cell phones discreetly being raised, filming, recording, eternalizing. Arthur Vasconcelos had not only fired a manager, he had broken a structure, an invisible layer that protected the prejudice behind positions and protocols. But he didn't stop there. Turning to Rubens and the other employees, he spoke in a serene but unquestionable voice. Gather the management. Team, I want a complete report on all the care provided in this unit in the last 6 months. Any pattern of exclusion, disrespect, or discrimination will be analyzed. What's more, starting today, we're starting the largest internal culture overhaul program this bank has ever seen. He took a deep breath and, in an unexpected gesture, climbed 2 steps of the central stairs of the lobby and addressed the audience directly there. My friends, Grand Capital Bank was born with a commitment to serve people, all people. It doesn't matter their age, their origin, their color, or the value they take into account. Today, this commitment has been broken, but he will not be forgotten. Because today, the victims of this breach were accompanied by the truth. He then looked at Luna and Leah, the two of them standing side by side, their faces still steady, but their eyes wet. The girls who had been exposed, now they were exalted. These 2 young women, he continued, are my daughters. But more importantly, they are exemplary citizens, award-winning students, future leaders. And today, they have taught us a lesson that not all executives can teach, that of never being silent in the face of injustice. A lady from the back applauded. One by one, the others followed. Within seconds, the lobby was filled with a round of applause. Customers, employees, and even the security guard who used to watch the girls. Clara had already been discreetly escorted out, but her name still echoed in the conversations. Not for revenge, but as a warning. And Luna and Leah, previously judged by a check, were now the symbol of a new time. Rubens approached with an emotional expression. He looked at the girls and said, I apologize. Really, I should have said something earlier. Arthur put his hand on his shoulder, firm. You can still do the right thing. Start by helping to rebuild, based on respect, equity, and listening. Luna then took the transparent envelope with the check from her backpack. He gave it to his father. He picked it up, smiled, and said, Now yes, let's make that deposit, as it should be. And so, under applause and cell phones filming, the twins went to the counter, now guided by the CEO himself, the same place where they were humiliated. Now it would be the stage of its consecration. But what they didn't know was that the greatest transformation was yet to come. The story of the twins, Luna and Leah, spread like fire in dry grass. In the days following the event, the video of the moment when Arthur Vasconcelos defends them in front of the entire agency went viral on all platforms. It wasn't just a video about power and privilege. It was about a system being exposed and confronted by those who have the courage and voice to change. The headlines multiplied. CEO fires manager for discrimination against daughters in bank. Branch. The day 2 girls taught an entire bank what respect means. Grand Capital's new policy says, but what would have been just another ephemeral corporate scandal turned into concrete action. Arthur called a national press conference. Next to him, Luna and Leah. On the table, 3 sealed documents. The first, the launch of a new code of ethics for inclusive service. The second, the creation of a permanent committee on diversity and customer rights. The third, a robust investment in the training of young people in financial education and social leadership. A program called Vasconcelos Sisters Project. Luna and Leah were now more than victims of an injustice. They have become a national reference. They have been invited to speak in schools, participated in interviews, and have become a symbol of a generation that does not lower its head. Not even when the system tries to put them in a glass room. The unit where it all happened underwent a symbolic renovation. The lobby has been restructured. In the space previously reserved for the isolation room, a panel was installed with the phrase, "Each customer is a story, and every story deserves respect." Just below, a black and white image of the 2 girls in school uniforms, side by side. Not as trophies, but as a living memory of the day the system was challenged, and it had to change. Former manager Clara Martins was officially dismissed and did not appeal. In his place, Rubens took over the management after going through the entire new requalification process. His first action, invite Luna and Leah to inaugurate the new welcome program for young customers. Arthur, for his part, returned to his corporate routine, but something about him had changed. His internal speeches were less technical, more human. His leadership now carried a visible trace of what he had never learned in economics school: the power to protect, not to control. What about the twins? They continued their studies. They kept creating, winning contests, dreaming. But now they knew something that no math primer teaches: that courage, when allied with the truth, has the power to reform not only institutions, but consciences. Sometimes the greatest lesson in courage comes from those the world insists on underestimating. Luna and Leah had no badges, job titles, or titles. They had only one check, one achievement, and the hope of being treated with respect. But they were silenced, exposed, humiliated, and yet they did not break, because the dignity that carries truth does not need authorization to exist. In this world where doors open to surnames and close to faces, 2 girls showed that no one needs permission to be seen. They didn't raise their voices to scream. They raised their heads to resist. And in the end, they proved that it is not the system that defines who you are. That's what you do when he tries to erase you. If you've ever been discredited just for existing, if anyone ever made you feel like you don't belong, so you need to watch this story to the end. Because today, those who were humiliated have become a symbol, and who pointed the finger. He was the one who left through the back door. Share this video with those who need to remember that respect is not asked for. It is imposed with truth. And never forget, the glass rooms that today try to trap you, tomorrow they can carry their name engraved on the wall.